Welcome to our series, The Battle for Public Education in the 21st Century. I'm Ken Yale, education correspondent for Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio.
Yeah, feel this from the bottom of my heart, y'all. Truly inspired. Here we go, come on, look, yo, just teaching to the test, forced by the feds, or they losing that check. Too many children left behind by this corporate assembly line. How they privatize education is a human right, and they kids gonna be fine. They send them to private schools, while ours get sent to prison or given a job serving fast food.
This is our third show exploring how social justice education shifts the corporate education paradigm. Today's show is entitled Obedience to Liberation. We begin with two longtime social justice activists. The first voice you'll hear is Dr. Bill Ayers, a retired professor of education and senior university scholar at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and then his brother, Dr. Rick Ayers, a professor in teacher education at the University of San Francisco. We join them in discussion about the deeper purposes of education.
We have to always ask, education for what purpose? Of course, we all want our kids to grow up to live full, complete, happy, purposeful lives. We want them to be able to love other people. We want them to be able to work and produce and contribute to society. But I think we have to say right from the start that if we aspire to educate free people, there's a certain requirement that goes with that, and that is that we don't want to teach either explicitly or implicitly that the highest value you can aspire to is obedience and conformity. We want to teach kids the values of initiative and courage and creativity and imagination, because free people require those kinds of qualities more than they require obedience or rule following. Being a good citizen involves being able to think critically about everything that's presented to you and being willing to engage with others in questioning the status quo, wondering about what's just and fair and decent, and then making the kind of moves that one has to make in order to contribute to this kind of society that we would like to live in.
Even the term teaching is problematic. It's a transitive verb. It suggests that I am handing something to you. I teach you. I possess something that you don't have, and I'm handing it over. Once you're in the classroom, you realize that that's a really inadequate term, that we are doing something together. Again, a human, messy, complicated enterprise. And a teacher, if I have to use the word, is only good if she constantly questions her own authority and constantly challenges the given dogma of what a body of knowledge is. So the development of knowledge is a constantly evolving thing.
The two of you wrote a powerful book together called Teaching the Taboo. What does that mean?
We think of the taboo as anything that challenges the dogma of common sense. The wondrous thing about a classroom is a classroom can be a setting where the curriculum of questioning is always in play. That is, a dogmatic classroom, whether it's progressive or conservative or traditional or experiential or whatever it might be, a dogmatic classroom is a classroom where, again, the conclusions are delivered. So you might say a more progressive person might deliver a more progressive view of history, and a more conservative person a more traditional view. But in a classroom of the type that we're thinking of, a classroom that teaches the taboo, whatever dogma is on the table, we get to ask the next question. And in some ways, that's why I think Rick and I and many of us, and I think you can, appreciate a classroom as a site of intellectual curiosity, a site of discovery and surprise.
You suggest in your book that schools reflect the society and the historical period they're located in. How is that playing out in U.S. schools today?
Every school in every society in every era is both mirror and window into the society that it's attached to. So in an agrarian, more primitive society, you would be teaching animal husbandry and crop rotation. And in a theocracy, you would be teaching obedience to the gods. In an authoritarian situation, you'd be teaching obedience and conformity. And the example I think we use is if you went and saw a school in the old South Africa, all you would have to do is look at the schools and you would know what apartheid is, because the schools under apartheid were a perfect reflection. When we talk about the goals of education and we say we want the kids to be on time, we want them to do their homework, we want them to not misbehave, we want them to stay away from drugs and alcohol, that's all true, but it's also true in an authoritarian society. It's true in fascist Italy. It's true in apartheid South Africa. So what else is important? And for us, The most important thing is that in a free society, we want to develop free people, and that requires classrooms that are deeply, deeply engaged in asking questions, critically reflecting, needing no one's permission to challenge the status quo, because that's what free people are capable of doing.
And I would add that, as we did in South Africa, you could look at the schools and understand what kind of society we live in. We have to look today at our schools to understand what our society is like. We all study the Brown versus Board of Education. We all talk about the great struggle to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, and the heroic work that people did. And yet I could take you 15 minutes from here to McClymonds High School in West Oakland. And it is all students of color. It is toe up and chained up and has very few supplies, and the situation is dire and incredibly difficult for students. And we could go 6 miles from there to Piedmont High School. And Piedmont High School is well-resourced, open campus, beautiful physics lab. If you're the teacher at McClymonds High School, not only would you talk about that, but I think you would walk out of the classrooms with the students and get on the bus.
Absolutely.
And go to Piedmont High School and walk up and down the hall and
Absolutely.
gaze in wonder.
You know,
the riot squad would come out. If I were a teacher at Piedmont High School, I would get on that bus and go to McClymonds. Come on, you guys.
That. I love that. The other thing I think that you're pointing to is that it's not just enough to ask questions, but you have to be willing to be honest about what you see right in front of you, because the kids see it, and they know that the grown-up world is a bunch of hypocrites. If I'm teaching in this system, and I go along with it, and I don't ever raise a question or a critique or ask the students to question things, aren't I complicit in the system, just as teachers 150 years ago, many of them must have been complicit in taking slavery as just common sense, just the way things are. What are you going to do?
What is social justice education?
I would say, for one thing, social justice education gets attacked and has been criticized by conservative cultural critics as left-wing organizing. Social justice, on one level, is something that's in the heart of the educational project. Nobody goes into teaching saying, I'm really looking forward to furthering the achievement gap, or I really want to send a lot of kids down to the suspension room. People go into teaching saying, I want success for all students. So everyone has an idea of social justice. What we're struggling to unpack then is, how does that work?
Then I would say social justice is a striving by people in different places, different times, different eras, using wildly different tactics and strategies and approaches to develop a society with more fairness, more equity, more recognition, more participation. And it's something that we should not be in the least bit defensive about, nor should we think of it as an add-on to an already overburdened set of requirements and curricular demands. It's not an add-on. It's at the heart of the matter. At the heart of the matter, in terms of democracy and participation and freedom, is the idea of justice.
Dr. Patrick Kamanian is an associate professor in the Teacher Education Department at the University of San Francisco. I asked him what a transformed public school system would be like if it was guided by a social justice purpose.
Social justice education wouldn't be centralized. It would take on a life of its own based on the articulated needs of the community that the education is based in. And in no way, shape, or form am I saying that a social justice education would undervalue reading, writing, math, science, the arts, or social studies. In fact, social justice education, the way I understand it and the way the research suggests, shows that the only way you get high levels of so-called achievement is when the education you're providing historically underserved students is humanizing. With the intensification of scripted curriculum and corporate textbooks, what we have seen is that we haven't treated children as the subjects of their own studies. We haven't used young people's lives as a starting place of all learning. These textbooks or teachers have come assuming that what children and communities have to offer to the learning isn't valuable to the education of the communities that they're actually doing the teaching in. That what's actually important are the values, beliefs, expectations, attitudes, and ideologies of the teachers and of the curriculum that's being brought to them. You know, a lot of times that curriculum is Eurocentric, it's sexist, homophobic, and it's culturally hostile. And so these schools and our classrooms really become hotbeds of social hatred. And young people know deep down in their heart, it's not just irrelevant, but it's at odds with the history and dignity of their humanity. So they engage in what Herb Cole referred to as willed not learning. This unwillingness to learn from someone who disrespects your dignity. And so what you would see in a classroom that teaches young people to develop a knowledge of self in the pursuit of self-love is that young people can treat their lives and their histories and their cultures and their communities as worthy of intellectual interrogation, as worthy of study, and that connections could be made between whatever's being read or written in the classroom to the actual communities that children live in. The curriculum that would be created would allow us to feel joy about ourselves, will allow us to bring in the painful past into the classroom in order to pave a pathway to a future that is promising. This type of curriculum will allow us to not simply cry about others, but to cry about ourselves. Will not only allow us to imagine ourselves in the world that already exists, but to allow us to imagine how to create the world we'd like to see with ourselves in it. So essentially, teaching young people knowledge of self allows them to understand who they are, how they became that way, start imagining who they want to be, and essentially start strategizing how they'll become that way.
Wow, that's a beautiful vision, Patrick. How can you help students bridge the differences between them that can get in the way of that vision?
We have to look at the different ways that this division is socially constructed. We might construct this narrative about someone where we say, hey, he thinks he's tougher than me. He's not tougher than me. Or another young person in that class might invest in another social construct and say, oh, she thinks she's cuter than me. She's not cuter than me. Or another person might say, she thinks she's smarter than me. She's not smarter than me. And all these sort of things that's happening, that's really a defense mechanism to protect our identity in what we imagine to be hostile conditions, which are in very real ways historically hostile conditions, and that oftentimes go overlooked by teachers. So there's no sense of camaraderie, there's no sense of unity, and there's no sense of solidarity. And so without that tension from the community oftentimes spills into school, and then the tensions that's played out in the school oftentimes spill into the classroom that disrupt a teacher's ability to even miseducate children, much less educate them. Oftentimes when children don't feel like the classroom space is safe, that their safety is not being considered, then through their willed not learning, will disrupt anything or everything a teacher is trying to teach, because in their minds, a lot of times it's, if you don't care about me, then I don't care about you, and I don't care about the learning of anyone in this classroom. The divide and conquer is almost ever present. Our responsibility as teachers who are interested in a humanizing education to disrupt that divide and conquer.
Shareem Hannigan-Martinez is a veteran English teacher at Castlemont High School in Oakland. Most of Castlemont students are Latino or African American, and nearly 90% are officially classified as, quote, socioeconomically disadvantaged. I asked Shareem what it means to her to be a social justice teacher.
For me, being a social justice teacher is about using the classroom as a means to disrupt and dismantle the same systems of oppression that have targeted my family for centuries and targeted my people for centuries and have caused so much unearned suffering to the lives of my folks and other oppressed folks worldwide, and to help young people really come to terms with all of the trauma that we carry from generations and generations of a colonial threat, an immediate colonial threat upon our bodies, and to help them heal and find a sense of self and self-worth and self-love and a sense of agency to join me in the struggle to disrupt those systems that have been targeting our bodies forever. Everything that we do is about them getting to know themselves and getting to know each other. And so in the process of really learning and unlearning so much about who they are and really coming into who they are becoming, and them sort of going through that process together, that they're really growing and identifying who they are. And there's a closeness that you develop when the person next to you is struggling and grappling with that same tension about who they want to be and what role they want to have in this world and how to make that work while still dealing with all the real conditions that they have to deal with on a daily basis.
Today, Patrick Kamanian is co-teaching with Shareem Hannigan-Martinez. The class is studying the autobiography of Assata Shakur. I'm speaking with 3 students, Stephanie Vega, Susana Lopez, and Jeremy Brooks. The background noise is the sound of students working in groups as they prepare presentations using 5 levels of analysis. Listen to this.
We're working on 5 levels of analysis and based on Asada Shakur's book, and we're basically analyzing some of her quotes.
Who is Asada Shakur? Because many people actually don't learn about Asada Shakur either in school or in the regular media. So say a little bit about who she is for listeners that don't know.
Well, Asada Shakur was part of the Black Panther Party and also from the Black Liberation Army. She was discriminated a lot because she was a person of color and she was fighting for liberation for her people. She's also Tupac's godmother.
You talked about the 5 levels of analysis. Can one of you explain that to me?
The 5 levels of analysis are explicit, which is facts, and they are things that you cannot really argue. They are sound. Implicit is suggestive meaning, so it's kind of like, and when you put those two together, I like to think about them as observation and inference, like what you can imply based on implicit. Theoretical is relating to philosophical ideas and bigger themes like racism, sexism, oppression. Interpretive is how relevant those things are and how it makes us feel as people. And applicable is what we can do about it and the steps that we can take to do something.
How do you feel about being in a class like this? What's meaningful to you about being in this kind of class?
To me, it's very meaningful because, actually, when I started high school, I was really naive and I was really, going along, systematic ways. So, basically, it really changed my thinking and, I always think before I make my actions or, I put my community before anything else sometimes. And it's very liberating because, especially, you learn about your ancestors, you learn about yourself, you're able to identify yourself. You're able to know where you come from, instead of just going by the dominant narrative that, systems put you through. And I really like taking these type of classes because you just work with people that actually want to know the truth and fight for what they love or fight for what they believe. Like Stephanie said, they teach you how oppressed you are. As she said, I was naive myself. Basically, the only reason why I came back to Castlemont was for this kind of classes because they're really motivating me to be better and actually make a change in our community and tell other people about oppression and how we're affected because many don't know.
For me, it's basically good to know that teachers want to open up our eyes to the oppression that we face, and it shows how much that they actually care about their students to not want them to be so led by the system and be so easily led to do what the system says as right or to be able to just thrive in the system, but being able to liberate ourselves so that we can break the system and break the cycle of oppression that we obviously face in our day-to-day lives.
This is the 3rd year Shireen Hanagan-Martinez has been teaching the same group of students. I asked her what she's noticed about her students' ability to engage more deeply in social justice education over time.
I think over time that they're able to take these really complex ideas that in reality they get. So as 9th graders, they understand oppression, right? It's their lived experience, and all that they're doing is getting a sociological term to name their experience. So they understand it. But there's a way in which I don't think in the first year that all young people really internalize those ideas and own them and really feel compelled or a sense of agency to engage with and transform those things in the way that they do 3 years in. As 9th graders, I taught a tiny excerpt of Asada. Right now they're juniors and they're reading all of it, and the way that they're able to engage and the way they're able to analyze is so profoundly different than they were as 9th graders. I think also because they're able to hold each other to a standard now. So there's this way I think that I'm seeing them not only feel empowered, but seeing their peers as agents of change in their own community. And so when they start to fall off, I see a lot of well, you got this, let's do this. We have this responsibility, and I think that that sort of collective responsibility takes years to build.
Let's leave it there for today. Every time we hear the corporate mantra on education, we can shift the paradigm from standardized to student-centered, from Eurocentric to culturally empowered, from obedience to liberation. College and career readiness are necessary but not sufficient purposes for education. Social justice education can support us to discover who we are and who we want to be, to envision the world we want, and to connect with others to make it a reality. Next week we'll go inside a school designed for social justice education. Many thanks to today's guests for sharing their deep insights and wisdom. Dr. Bill Ayers, Dr. Rick Ayers, Dr. Patrick Kamanyan, Shireen Hanagan-Martinez, Stephanie Vega, Susana Lopez, and Jeremy Brooks. Check out the Flashpoints website at flashpoints.net to hear all the programs and the full interviews used to make them. For Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio, I'm Ken Yale. The executive producer of Flashpoints is Dennis Bernstein. Technical director is Mike Biggz.